very much. It's an honor to be here today. And I'm going to be talking about electricity. This is a topic that Bob Wilson introduced me to when I was a PhD student, because California was trying to figure out electricity restructuring at the time. And they, of course, called Bob. And he presented some of his work in the PhD classes, which was great. I really didn't start working in electricity until 1998 when Al Clavoric called me up. Actually, Al didn't call me up. It was somebody at the system operator at ISO New England, but I'm sure Al Clavoric nudged them to call me because they were just doing their restructuring and they had their market rules. And Al thought it would be a pretty good idea to have somebody like myself look at them. And I said, well, okay, I'm happy to look, but Bob Wilson knows a lot more about electricity than I do. So can I do this with Bob Wilson? And he was delighted. And so that's how it happened. Al was the chairman of the board at the time at New England. And so we wrote a report, and I think they were kind of expecting that we would look through it and maybe say a few things, but basically bless their design that the stakeholders came up with. But instead, what we did was we wrote a report that was actually quite critical of many aspects of the design. There were parts of it that we did not understand at all. And we told them so they should just eliminate it because it didn't make any sense. And there was double counting and there was all this, all these problems. And so we wrote this report, and it turned out to be a work program for the system operator for the next couple decades to work through the various recommendations. And it was just so much fun and so insightful to work with Bob on that project. So that's why I'm talking about electricity. This is a market design talk. It's not a game theory talk. There's lots of game theory under the hood, but it's deep under the hood. So I'm really not going to focus on that today. This is going to be very practical. It's one of the things I love about market design is you do get to do practical things. And since you're solving real world problems, you have to use lots of different ideas, different disciplines, draw on different people, engineers and political scientists and psychologists and everything, and economists and computer scientists in order to solve these practical problems. And for me, that's fun because it's just, there's so much I get to learn. There's so much I don't know much about. And, but anyway, what I want to do in my minutes this morning, your afternoon, is to talk about the crisis that Texas just had in their electricity market. And this is a remarkable event because Texas, I think if you ask the electricity market designers around the world, what's sort of the state of the art in terms of design, they would point to Texas as among the best in terms of their electricity market design. And if you look at Texas too, it's also has this amazing energy infrastructure, gas and so on, right there. And so things are looking pretty good, and the market actually worked very well. It had some early problems like all the markets did before it introduced nodal pricing and other innovations like that in 2011, but then it's been smooth sailing. And Texas, unlike the other markets, has operated with a fairly tight reserve margin at 1%. And of course, makes it harder for the system to remain reliable. And yet Texas was able to manage some 2017, a very difficult summer with 8% reserve margin, no problem. The other system operators have reserve margins typically more like in the 20% to 30% range. And some markets are even higher than that. But Texas just had this big disaster. So what happened? Well, the first thing to note is there's many interconnected systems. The biggest driver of the event was the weather, extreme cold for a very long period of time. And that had impact on electricity, on water system, and gas systems, all three. And they're all interconnected. And of course, that impacted the people. In terms of the depth, how low the temperature went, it was actually much worse than the 2011 event. Now, I was on the board at the time of this event and have been on the board, was on the board from 2015 till shortly after the event. And everybody, since I joined the board in 2015, everyone talked about this terrible year, 2011, where they had this unbelievable winter and then an unbelievably cold winter and unbelievably hot summer. Really terrible weather. So that was actually the year that we always used as our worst case scenario. And we wanted to be reliable with respect to this worst case scenario. And as you can see in this picture, 2021 was much worse in terms of how cold it got relative to 2011. And then people pointed to 1989. 1989 got just as cold as 2021, but it stayed cold for a much shorter period. And so that's why 2021 looks so much worse in this picture. So it was both the breadth, the depth, how cold it got, and the breadth, the fact that it affected all the counties for many days. And that's what really led to the disaster. This is just another way to look at it. All the really cold, the big cold snaps for the last 100 years. And as you can see, 2021 was actually not that too far from normal for these extreme cold snaps that you have every decade or so. But the duration of the event was, and that turned out to be the real killer. Now, as I said, we've got all these interrelated systems. Well, one of the things that's most important for electricity in most parts of the United States and the world really is natural gas. Because especially during these shortage events, you rely on natural gas for firm energy. And what happened here is natural gas failed first. So we see well before electricity outages, the natural gas supply falling off sharply. And this is a huge problem for Texas because it relies so heavily, especially in these extreme events, on natural gas. Coal, in recent years, coal has been largely eliminated. And so, huge problem. Here's another picture showing the drop-off of natural gas during the event. And you can see the duration of the drop-off. So we lost gas for 4 hours. We lost gas for multiple days, several days before the event and right up until we came back. In 1989, when it was last time this cold, the gas prices, they went up a little bit, but not too much. And that was because of the duration of the event. Gas is readily stored. But when an event lasts many days, it's going to have huge impacts on prices. And this you see across the nation, the price is going crazy. So the normal price for gas would be $3. And you can see this is 100 times higher than that in Texas. And even when you look at Los Angeles, it's not cold in Los Angeles. The gas price is 50 times normal. So just a huge impact from gas. Now, the interesting thing is after the 2011 event, it wasn't such an extreme event, but there was outages. And so it was carefully studied by FERC, NERC, the two federal regulators, and by ERCOT. And ERCOT did a study in 2013 that looked at the impact of extreme cold on the supply of gas, because this vulnerability was illustrated in 2011. And when you look at this cubic estimation, what you find is that if we look over here, this is 1989, 45% loss of gas supply. Guess what? 2021, just as cold. What did we have? 45% loss of gas supply, exactly the same. And so it's, this was a predictable event, and we should have had, we basically need to make the gas supply work. And it didn't work. And so that was the big problem on the supply side. The other side of this shortage is the demand side. And Texas relies on electric heating for most of the homes in Texas. And worse than that, it's when it gets very cold, it becomes resistance heating, which is extremely inefficient and consumes vast amounts of electricity. And so there's a huge spike in demand. And so this sharp drop in supply together with this huge spike in demand led to very high prices. Now the high prices, I'm going to first look at this from a trader's point of view. And so this is from the system operator. This is public information that everybody sees in real time. This is the prices in the nodal market. And this is actually on the 13th. The outages didn't start until the 15th. So this is before we start to have outages. We already have $9,000 prices, which is as high as it is as the price. That's the price cap, the value of lost load. Normally, the price would be $25. Again, from the trader's perspective, looking at this event, sitting here on the 13th, so I'm sitting here right at this point right here, and I've got, I'm observing the real-time prices. This is the historical real-time prices, but I'm looking at the day-ahead prices, which are going into the thousands of dollars. So I know things are tight, but then here's the rolling 7-day forecast for what load's gonna look like. And this is a horror show up here, okay? Because the annual peak, which occurs in Texas in the summertime, when it's super hot in August, is 75 gigawatts. So here, they're forecasting in the wintertime a peak that is higher than the all-time summer peak. So this is just, crazy. There's absolutely no chance we're going to be able to serve load. There's going to be shortage when things look like this. And the question is, how bad is it going to be? And so at this point on Saturday, essentially the governor should be giving press conferences that the situation is very serious. And the system operator should be conveying that to the governor. And, but somehow the communication didn't work out as well as it could have. I'll come to that in a second. But what this picture shows, this is the final picture from a trader's point of view, is this is ex post what actually happened. And you can see Texas is serving massive amounts of load, 70, the winter peak is more like 55 gigawatts. And we're successfully serving 70 gigawatts until at 1 a.m. The thermal plants started to fail, and lots of them in rapid succession, and mostly gas, but also coal and even nuclear failed. So we have all these failures reducing the supply that's available, and we've got this extreme cold, which is causing all that resistance heat to drive up, and there's absolutely no way to balance supply and demand, and this is the shortage.
Can we, a clarification question?
Sure.
Why did nuclear and coal plants fail? Gas, you said there was
yeah, coal actually, so gas failed for lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons in any kind of systemic failures like this, but the gas supply was probably the largest one, but then there was also freezing at the plant. The coal is actually liquefied, and that froze. So it's, even though it's sitting on site, to get to burn, it first gets liquefied and then flows in, and that all froze. And then the nuclear, it was some controls, and that should never have happened. The nuclear control should never have frozen, because that certainly should have been fully winterized, but it was insufficient. And there's lots of wind and solar, especially wind in Texas. Texas has more wind than anybody else in the United States. And there's hours where we get well over half of our production from wind. And wind and solar actually through the whole event, they actually performed better than expected in a extreme cold event. They overperformed, whereas the thermal resources grossly underperformed. Now let me look at it from a system. This is in the control room. So we're sitting in the control room, and electricity is an interesting product because we have to balance supply and demand in every second, and we have enormous shocks to both supply and demand all the time. Units fail, there's big weather events, whatever, and yet we have to balance in real time. And so what that leads to is enormous price variability. So the real-time price of electricity moves from minus $200 to plus $9,000. And it can do this all in the span of 5 or 10 minutes. So it's very interesting from an economist's point of view, because we're really using prices to balance the system. And we're able to do that almost all the time. So here we are at 1 a.m. And what happens here is the generating units start tripping at 1:43, a succession of trips. We've already had lots of outages. We already have 35 gigawatts out. And so many have occurred already, but then they start coming in fast succession. And what happens is the system loses frequency. It doesn't fail right away, it just, the frequency falls down. And so it's supposed to be at 60 hertz, and now it's falling off of 60 hertz. And it's not falling very much. You can see there's not that much room to work with here, because we're essentially in free fall now. And 59.4 is an important marker, because if you have frequency below 59.4 for any sustained period, the automatic controls are going to drop further units, and you'll have a cascade blackout. And if you fall below 59.3, same thing, automatic controls will almost instantly force the units off to protect themselves. And so anyway, we've got this free fall. So they're ordering load shedding. The 1 gig of load shed here didn't do the job. 3 more gigawatts shed, and then 3.5 more. And finally, this 3 stabilized things. And then the 3.5 more got us back up, approaching 60 hertz. So basically, over 10 gigawatts had to be shed in this short period of time in order to bring us back to 60 hertz, but we were. And that's very good news, because if Texas had a blackout, it would have been incredibly difficult to bring the system back online, because we don't have things like Niagara Falls or the Hoover Dam, large hydro resources that can very easily bootstrap the system up. We'd be doing this with diesel generators, and it's a problem. So that's the good news. But a lot of load was shed, and shed for a long time because of the magnitude. These outages could not be rotated across customers. So many customers, about a few million customers, were out for multiple days during this extreme cold. This is just another picture showing the thermal outages and the about 10 gigawatts of underperformance relative to the extreme winter event scenario that was modeled. And this shows actually the circle is the size of the outage, and the color is the performance. And essentially, this is the wind resources during the storm. And this is day 1, day 2, day 3, day 6. And the wind resources are all here, and you can see they're by and large they're overperforming relative to expectations. But what happens here is when we had the outages in these 3 days, the thermal outages where the people live were what causing the problem. And as soon as we got the thermal resources back on, then the lights came on. So the system to date, and this is something every system in the world needs to work on, is focused on reliability, which is sort of everyday events, bad weather, outages that you can statistically model and guard against. And in that sense, the system was reliable, but it was not resilient to systemic failure, which is what we had. And so really you should be thinking about systemic failure and how can you prepare against the systemic failure by preparing beforehand. How can you alleviate the problem during the event? How can you recover after the event as quickly as possible? And then finally, and this is the stage we're in now, how can you learn from the event to make sure that it doesn't happen again? And so that's the process that we're going through. I wanted to mention several things that I think that the system operator could do and the regulator could do in order to make things better. And I start with communications because this is something that has about zero marginal cost and can be done very quickly. And so it's got the best bang for the buck in terms of what to improve. Whereas winterizing all the windmills, that would be extremely expensive. And similarly for the gas lines and so on. Much of that should happen, but the first thing to start with is what can be done most easily, which is communications. And you can see there's lots of different parties. The system operator is sort of in the center, communicating to the generators, the distribution companies, and the retail service providers about what's happening, and also simultaneously to the regulator, the PUC, and the governor, so that they can communicate to the public about what's happening. And of course, the retail service providers are also communicating to the public and communicating to their customers, which is the public. So what I would have liked is messages coming from the governor's office like this, which is basically telling people that we've got this serious problem and turn your thermostats down. If for some reason you have electricity, then turn your thermostats down, get out the ski jacket, put it on, and give other Texans a little bit of electricity too. So this would have been my main message coming from the governor's office, but unfortunately we did not get messages like that. And the governor is the right one to send it, not the system operator, because the governor is he's the one with the TV camera pointing at him. So yeah, that's where I think the leadership for communication to the public should be exercised. Improve critical infrastructures. So you cannot have reliable electricity and resilient electricity without reliable and resilient gas. Natural gas for at least the next 20 years is going to be a backbone to the electricity system resilience. There's moments when the renewables the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, and gas is going to be your backstop to get you through those difficult periods. So we have to make this resilient. That's a huge problem. You'd think, well, Texas got lots of gas, let's just make it resilient. It's not that easy, because when we look at who profited and who lost from this event, basically everybody lost a lot, except for the gas supply. So people on the gas supply made tens of billions of dollars, and that's a problem. So they basically have the wrong incentive to be reliable. They benefit collectively from the scarcity. And so this is where regulation is most needed. At the same time, we need improved energy efficiency in order to prevent an explosion of demand during these extreme cold periods. And of course, that energy efficiency helps not just in the wintertime, but it helps against the summer peak, as well, which brings enormous value because you have to build fewer generating resources then. Electricity market design really does matter. And as I said, this was a very good design in terms of the electricity market, but the connection with the gas market needs to be worked on. Like all the US restructured markets, it relies on a day-ahead market for scheduling resources, which is a fully optimized market, finding the Walrasian prices that are going to guide behavior in preparing for the day, and then these circumstances will change, and we'll have a physical real-time market which will settle any deviations from the real-time from the day-ahead schedule. And this is really the state of the art. ERCOT has it. It works really well. All the electricity markets in the United States have it. Europe doesn't. Europe needs this desperately. And I think we'll have this eventually. It's just going to take some time. But there's consensus that this basic approach is quite sound and does induce efficient behavior, even though we're operating in an environment where the Walrasian equilibrium doesn't necessarily exist.
Peter, may I I'm looking at the number of your slides.
Yes.
You have a little bit under 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, good. I will continue. So the lots of other things that ERCOT needs to do, and the forecasting is very important. All these new things that are happening make forecasting that much more important. We have to integrate battery storage. We have to accommodate distributed generation. There was one thing that was a particular aspect of the market design that was problematic was the winter circuit breaker. We didn't have a winter circuit breaker. We had a summer circuit breaker. And like most financial markets, circuit breakers serve a very important role during times of extreme events. And so that's something that needs to be done and is done very easily. So that's good. One of the things that I want to emphasize is the importance of facilitating forward transactions and there's much that the system operators of the future can do to improve the efficiency and liquidity of forward trade. The existing day-ahead and real-time markets help a lot, but even more can be done. And I don't have time to talk about the details, but I should say that another feature that was people pointed to as perhaps was a problem was the absence of a capacity market. So Texas is an energy-only market. It doesn't have a capacity market like the other restructured markets in the United States, especially on the East Coast. And so people pointed to that, and that was not an issue. We had lots of resources. The capacity market guarantees that you have enough resources. There was plenty of resources. They just couldn't produce energy because they didn't have any gas primarily. And so this was one of the things that Bob and I struggled with, the design of capacity markets early on, and they've improved enormously, but they are a bit of a problem because they can hide particular issues. So I look at this bike here, an all tricked out bike with training wheels and so on, as something that's a capacity market that's come through the stakeholder process. And instead, a balanced bike like this is really, I think, a much better way to learn how to ride the bike because it forces you to focus on the central problem, which is balance. And that's the system operator's problem, balancing the market. So it looks much more like my bike there. And here's a proposal for a forward energy market that would potentially replace capacity markets or support better an energy-only market with highly efficient and liquid forward trade. Climate policy is a big thing, and we're going through a energy transition over the next several decades, and we need to understand it. So my work with my colleagues, we've been modeling this in PJM, and we're days away from having our a draft of the paper available that includes data and results. And it's interesting in that it's a problem that looks like it would be completely intractable. We're modeling PJM entry and exit on an annual basis, real-time behavior at the 5-minute level over a period of many decades. And with investors that have foresight and consistent expectations. And believe it or not, we are able to solve this even with storage, even with price responsive demand, and these innovations like distributed energy resources. And it's amazing what one can do with computation these days, solving these problems that are quite vast, but very important for the energy of the future. And so let me end with this picture of Texas and the Western and Eastern interconnects, which are the two major interconnections in the United States. And really, in the long term, what we need is much greater connection among one of the things we need, much greater interconnection among these systems, and then that will enhance the resilience and reliability of the entire system. So I end there. Thank you.